Hello, welcome once again to our continued conversation and discussion. My name is Dion, and this is Operation Isaiah 58 Biblical Literacy Institute, where we are reading critically as a righteous act. We are a reading forum and or book club, and this series of discussion is entitled Identity Empowerment. And we are exploring the identity empowerment theory as was discussed earlier in the other videos. Now, some might wonder, why do you say you're reading critically as a righteous act? And the reason why, and we say that at the Biblical Literacy Institute, is because it's in the Bible. In the Bible, it tells us to prove all things. And when you're getting into this area of proving, it means that you're going to demonstrate the truth or existence of something by providing evidence or argument. And whenever you're providing evidence, all of us know that that's a scientific endeavor. And so when it says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. When you look up that word prove in the dictionary, you'll find exactly what the Bible is promoting. It's promoting that we have to be able to provide evidence. What is the perfect will of God? Now, another scripture that supports the critical reading as a righteous act is the scripture in 2 Timothy 2:15, where we're admonished to study. Yes, it says to study. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And we know that there can be no justice without the truth. And if you look up the word study in the dictionary, it means the devotion of time and attention to acquiring knowledge on an academic subject, especially by means of books. Another definition is a detailed investigation and analysis of a subject or situation. And here, we have some synonyms: investigation, inquiry, research, examination, survey, scrutiny, evaluate, interpret. And so these are all scientific terms. And in analysis, as all of us are well aware, when you're going into analysis, you're going to critical thinking, the critical thinking realm. And that's why we state that reading critically is a righteous act, because the Bible admonishes to do so. Now, some might state, is the Bible promoting the scientific, or ask the question, is the Bible promoting the scientific method? Well, here's a book that I will also be introducing on the forum, the reading forum, later on. We are going to be reading, this is a heads up for those of you who are interested. You might want to go out and purchase the book that made your world: How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization by Vishal Magawati. And he's going to confirm some of the sentiments that I'm bringing forth about the Bible and its scientific method when he states this, quote, "The Bible created a peculiar religious person called the schoolman or scholastic." A peculiar religious person. Now, he uses this religious person in a different way that your modern day churches would use the word, because according to this scholar, a religious person was a scholastic. He used logic as his primary tool to study divinity or God or Yah. And he goes on to state, no earlier culture had created such a rational man with the intellectual capacity for establishing the foundations of the nation state. So here, let's break this down. He said that you have to have an intellectual capacity to establish a nation state, first and foremost. The intellectual capacity for establishing parliaments, democracy, commerce, banking, higher education, and various literary forms, such as novels and history. And by the way, did you know, I might have mentioned this, some of you probably may know this, but that the Bible utilizes there's over 200 identifiable literary forms that the authors of the Hebrew Bible used when they were writing the Bible. And that's another subject that we will be discussing. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Keep your seatbelts on, because we are going to be going into the literary forms that used in the Hebrew Bible. All this nonsense, folk walking around talking about the Bible is nothing but a book of myths and fairy tales. As Pastor Odimba said, that's because they want to justify their own ignorance. But when you start to study and do your research, you'll find out that is not the case. Now, he's talking about the book that made your world, Vishal Magwadi. Now, he goes on to state this, look, here it is, that word, the scientific, technological, military, and economic success of the West came from the fact that it became a thinking civilization. And when we talk about the West, we're talking about the Greco-Romans, Western civilization, white folk, as we all, AKA. It came from the fact that they became a thinking civilization. And as some of you know, prior to them picking up the Bible or becoming, as they call, Christians, well, we know when they say Christendom or Christianization, that means they were reading the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. And prior to that, they were illiterate. And when I'm talking about illiterate, I mean, they didn't know about literary forms, literary genres, and whatnot. Critical reading, critical analysis. They were irrational, as he says. Was rationality a coincidence of history? You know, when you go and you start studying English literature and the age of reason, they call it. But he's asking the question, was it a coincidence of history, or did the Bible promote rationality because it informed the West that the ultimate reality behind the universe was the rational word logos? And there's a footnote here, which we're going to get into. Logos of a personal God. It was not, as Indian sages thought, primeval silence. And you can see this man, he is clearly Indian. And he's exposing his own tradition of the Indian sages. And he said it was not, as Indian sages thought, primeval silence. You know, all this meditation foolishness that's going around these days. Senseless sound mantra, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, energy, or impersonal consciousness. He said it wasn't about that, or what the other cultures were going around promoting. Now, this is the footnote about logos. The Greeks used the term logos to refer to the spoken word as well as to the unspoken word, still in the mind of reason. I made a little mistake. It should be still in the mind reason. They also use the term to mean, now get this, follow me, quote, the rational principle that governs all things. In the New Testament, the Apostle John used logos. You know, in the book of John, first one, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That word in the Greek means logos. So in the beginning was the logos. Some of you heard him preach on it, T.G. Jakes. They'll tell you in a minute, it means logos. So in the beginning was the rational principle that governs all things. When you break it down critically and analytically. In the New Testament, the Apostle John used logos. John's use of logos became the key to the West becoming a thinking civilization. And there it is. Now, this is the book that made your world, how the Bible created the soul of Western civilization. And we're going to be reading this book soon as well. So when we talk about the Bible promoting the scientific method, that's another evidence and information, proof that yes, indeed, the Bible said it first. The Hebrew Bible said it first. So whoever is going around lying and telling our people that the Bible is nothing but a book of myths and fairy tales, well, you do the math about what kind of person that is. Okay. Now, another reason why we do what we do here is because we are admonished to be ready to give an answer. It says here in black and white, 1 Peter 3:15, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. And so that's why we study, because we know we want to be ready to give an answer. Now, we went over in the last discussion, I wanted to kind of recap some of the information that was brought out in the last discussion about identity empowerment theory. And some of you who want more of an in-depth, I just want to draw some link, not everything that, is being said in this theory, but we want to just draw some ideas and some language out of these ideas that are being put on the table by this person. And they're suggesting that the heightening of individuals' awareness of patterns of interaction in their families, belief systems, social class, culture, and society and history. And the key word is history for me. And not this racist, lying white history that we've been given, but an accurate history as key social processes in defining themselves is a critical initial stage of their becoming more empowered. And so, the question was asked, how is it that we as Black folk are going to be able to find ourselves and respond to our reality in a world without the benefit of an accurate history? How are you empowered and we don't know who we are? So this theory suggests that history as a key, knowing history and the accurate history is a key in the social processes in defining yourself and the initial stage in becoming more empowered. Also, it states here that as in all social conditions, identity is empowered as we become historical actors in our own right. We have to be participants, and as we're learning about our identity through the book that we're reading currently, I feel, based on the information that we're being given at this time, the narrative of peoplehood, of who we are, the history, that, Pastor Odimba said that the Jews were a prophecy-governed people. And so we have to understand our culture, our tradition, the history, and this information, so we can be participants in our rights, in gaining our inheritance. And some call it reparations, but the Bible calls it inheritance. Now, it was also stated in about identity empowerment that the identity is derived from their knowledge of their membership. So here's the word knowledge. Within a social group, together with the value and emotional significance attached to that membership. And so we want to hone in on this language that, you know, there's value there. Not everything is about your pocketbook. I know that's the value system and the ideology of the Greco-Roman Western civilization. You know, let them tell it, you know, that happiness consists in outward prosperity and materialism. But some are saying that, you know, identity, that your membership within a social group, that there's value there. And emotional significance attached to that membership. An individual's membership with social groups not only contributes to their self-definition, it also contributes positively or negatively to the image he or she has of him or herself. Now, this is what Pastor Odimba stated in his lecture that he was giving. When he stated, and it reminded me of what was stated here, when he said that the fact of forgetting your identity and your history is already suicide, because you forget all the rights you have attached to your identity. There's rights, you know, we over here in the land of our enemies, using the biblical language, you know, that he would scatter, he said, I will scatter you in the land of your enemy, and where you have to fight for your civil rights. You know, but because Pastor Odimba said you forgot your identity and you don't understand, you don't know your rights that is attached to your identity. You forgot that you have rights attached to your identity. There's rights that are attached to your identity. But here in America, we know that they're having some issues with that, giving you your rights. So this was an interesting question that came out of that conversation. It was asked, well, we're already African, so what does Jewish identity add to our lives? And I thought this was a brilliant response when Pastor Odimba said, well, I think the question should be, why are we Africans and not Ethiopians or Egyptians? Yeah, that's when you start to get into the critical analytical realm. You know, that and that's a perfect question. And he goes on to state, because if you look at it in history, the word Africa didn't exist. Even the word Ethiopia had its popularity during a certain time in history. The name of the continent suddenly becomes changed to Africa. This is what Pastor Odimba stated. So he stated, look, so first we have to ask ourselves the question, where did the word Africa come from? Because for a name to dominate like Egypt, and remember in our last discussion, the whole continent of Africa was at one time referred to as Egypt. Yes. Because for a name to dominate like Egypt and Ethiopia and Nubia, so it is that the name Africa had to have enormous impact for it to remain up until now. In fact, the name Africa comes from, and we discussed this in the last video, the word Afrikaya, and is from the 7th century up to the 4th century when Islam wanted to exterminate all those who were enemies of the religion of Islam. So the word Africa simply means enemy of Islam. He stated that it was the Jews that were in Jeddah, Mecca, and all those places before that were called Afrikaya, and this name has remained ever since, and it brings the same consequence in different forms. Something to think about. Yes, indeed. So I just wanted to give you some images of, so we can become more aware and critical in our analysis of who we're surrounded by, the different peoples and what they look like. Now, these are our people right here. This is the family. This is the family. You can tell by the nose, prominent nose, prominent lips, right? I forgot the exact language that, one moment, I'm going to use the exact language that Pastor Odimba used. One moment, please. It says here, when it was referring to the Egyptian race, the philosopher described Pancartes. Lucian, the philosopher, described Pancartes, the Egyptian scribe, in the following manner: large, flat nose, prominent lips, and thin legs. Such was the Egyptian citizen to whom the Greek hero of Philospades was sent to study. Now, there you have it. Now, Shem, as we've been all discussing, and the conversation that we should all know, those of you who've been following the conversation, this is Shem and this is Ham. And you can see clearly the different features. This is Shem, the Black race, the Semitic Black race, Semitic, and this is the Hamitic Black race. Okay, you see the difference? You can see clear. And these people are very tall. Now, here is, I found this article, Bridging the Gap, Fixing the Divide Between Africans and African Americans. Now, if you look at these people, these are Africans and African Americans. You cannot tell them apart. The Bantu African, the Semitic Black race. Which one is an African and which one is an African American? The Bantu African. You can't tell. You see, the same, we have the same features. This is the family here, people. Wake up. This is the Great Awakening. I hope this is the Great Awakening. I hope you're following, you're getting on board. This is the family here. All right. Now, this is not the family. You see, this is the Black Hamitic, as Pastor Odimba is bringing it out. This is the Black Hamitic race. Hamitic. They're Black too, but they're Hamites. You can see the difference. You see how tall they are? You look at the body. In Numbers chapter 13:33, it states, there we saw the Nephilim, the Anakites come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seem like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. It's in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Very tall people. We have the same pigmentation, but we're from a different race or lineage. Some of you remember this slide from a following conversation. The Anak, the Anakites. The word Anak means long neck. Okay, and so these are the Anakites. Now, before we get into the reading, the continuing of chapter 5, The Great Secrets of Israel by Pastor Thomas Odimba, I want to just reiterate what he stated when he said we have to look for what was stolen from us. And when people and family, we really, really have to just get this cemented in our mentality. And you know, with so much going on in the world, I think that somewhere along the line, we have forgotten this, that, you know, something was stolen from us. And Pastor Odimba said that we have to know that we were robbed of something. And it's that thing that we have to look for and know its importance or value, as some of the sociologists have stated before in the previous slides. And he says it's not about conversion, like some of the Jews in the state of Israel, they want you to talk about convert. And Pastor Odimba said, no, we're not talking about conversion. He states that it's about our identity. You don't have to convert to something that is your identity. He said that it's about reclaiming, and it's about being, he said, I'm gonna get that next time. He said it's more appropriately should be phrased a rebirth. And I like that language of rebirth because it fits nicely with what the Messiah, when he said, Jesus Christ, when he said, you must be born again. You see how that fits? You must be born again. That means you have to lay down the Greco-Roman Western civilization history and ideology and ontology and epistemology. Yes, indeed. You got to be born again. And he said that it's about, you know, you got to come to your identity. It's about identity and personality. And you know, I'm not, you know, all of us have been Hellenized and whatnot, and walking around acting like we are acting like the pagans because we've been Hellenized. We have their personality. They used to say, you act like a white girl. They don't say that no more, but that's when I was growing up. They would tell you in a minute, why are you acting like a white girl? What were they saying? Why your personality, your personality, you know? And he said, identity is the function of every movement and every blessing we have from God. Now, what was stolen from us? And I remember I had said in my last video that I was going to produce some slides on linguistic genocide. And I don't hear too much talk about this, about the linguist, not just the cultural genocide and the intellectual genocide from the anti-literacy laws. You know, those laws that was legislated in America where it was illegal to teach the enslaved to read and write for hundreds of years. In addition to that, you know, we had this linguistic genocide. Now, look, it says here, when the United Nations undertook preparatory work for what became the 1948 International Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, linguistic genocide as a central aspect of cultural genocide was discussed, along with physical genocide as a serious crime against humanity. The ad hoc committee that prepared the convention specified the following types of acts as examples of cultural genocide in Article 3. And this is all online. This is not hidden in vaults in the universities anymore. The Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, the eternal one, has caused all this truth and the information to be made available to his people. Somebody told me a lie has an expiration date. So all this, not all of it, but a majority of this information, enough of it is available, widely available. It's not conjecture, it's not opinion, no more. It's online. Back in the 80s and 90s, who knew? Before the internet, who knew? Right? We have the Bible, but you know, like I said, because a lot of us, our people, the family, we're the victims of the anti-literacy laws. So we weren't able to really read the Bible critically and analytically. We didn't have the education, the understanding, the intellectual capacity to tackle some of the language in the Bible. But now it's all there. Now with this, he says here, Article 3, quote, any deliberate act committed with the intent to destroy the language, religion, or culture of a national, racial, or religious group on grounds of national or racial origin or religious belief, such as 1, prohibiting the use of the language of the group in daily intercourse, or in schools, or in the printing and circulation of publications in the language of the group, and 2, destroying or preventing the use of libraries, museums, schools, historical monuments, places of worship, or other cultural institutions and objects of the group. Now get this, when the UN General Assembly finally approved the convention, 16 member nations voted against Article 3. Now, are you surprised? They voted against Article 3 covering linguistic and cultural genocide. Official records of the General Assembly, 3rd session, part 1, 6th committee, 83rd meeting. Among those who opposed the prohibition of cultural genocide were Denmark and your United States and Great Britain. And you know, Britain wanted the convention to be restricted to only physical and extermination of human groups. Okay, and this is, and you can find this information on encyclopedia.com. Now, also known as language death. In linguistics, language death occurs when a language loses its we're talking about what was stolen. Pastor Odimba said that we have to first look into what and realize that something was stolen, and it's that thing that was stolen or robbed that we must look for. In linguistics, language death occurs when a language loses its last native speaker. By extension, language extinction is when the language is no longer known, including by second language speakers. Other similar terms include linguicide, the death of a language from natural or political causes, and rarely glottophagy, the absorption or replacement of a minor language by a major language. In the modern period, 1500, Common Era present following the rise of colonialism, language death has typically resulted from the process of cultural assimilation, leading to language shift and to the gradual abandonment of a native language in favor of a foreign lingua franca, largely those of European countries. And here you have the last 3 speakers of the Magadi key. You see that? The last 3 speakers. During language loss, sometimes referred to as obsolescence in the linguistic literature, the language that is being lost generally undergoes changes as speakers make their language more similar to the language to which they are shifting. The process of change has been described by Appel in 1983 in two categories, though they are not mutually exclusive. Often speakers replace elements of their own language with something from the language they are shifting toward. Also, if their heritage language has an element that the new language does not, speakers may drop it. Now, results, language death results in, ebonics, what they call ebonics, from Black folks, the way Black people speak. They call it ebonics. The result is of language death, overgeneralization, undergeneralization, loss of phonological contrast, loss of variability, changes in word order, morphological loss. What this is, such as was seen in Scottish Gaelic in Eastern Sutherland, Scotland, as fluent speakers still use the historic plural formation, whereas semi-speakers use simple suffixation or did not include any plural formation at all. You notice they don't mention such as was seen in the Black race, the so-called African Americans. They go right to the Scottish. Interesting. Somebody told me it's not always what's said, it's what's not said that we should pay attention to show you where you are. Who are you dealing with? The Bible said that you would be in the land of your enemies. And so your enemies are going to do what an enemy is going to do, what an enemy is going to do. He said, I will scatter them in the land of your enemy. So I'm not surprised. Are you? Also, synthetic morphosyntax may become increasingly analytic, syntactic loss, lexical categories, complex constructions, relexification, loss of word formation, productivity, style loss, such as the loss of ritual speech, morphological level. And that's why, forgive me, y'all, if I don't speak correct English all the time, and sometimes my grammar is not on point, this is why. We, not just me, we are victims. It's not an excuse, it's a real. This is accurate, this is history. We are victims of linguistic genocide, language death. So please forgive me if I display loss of word formation. Huh? And whatnot. I got another slide I was supposed to have. Okay, so health consequences. There are health consequences for language death. Did we know that? When a language dies, a complex loss occurs beyond speech. And Pastor Odimba said, we have to know that something was stolen, something was robbed. We were robbed of something. It was a loss. And the health consequences, this is on Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. They said that there's some health consequences for language death. And when a language dies, a complex loss occurs beyond speech, including connection to, identity. Identity. Loss and connect. And Pastor Odimba said it best when he said that it's very hard to subdue a people who have a profound knowledge of their history. So of course they had to make it so that you couldn't speak your language and make you illiterate by enacting the anti-literacy laws, because they don't want you to have no connection to your identity. See that? That's the process of Hellenization. They want you to be, what you see today What we see today, that's what has happened. We've become Hellenized. Most of our people are Hellenized. No connection to their identity. And this is the health consequences and well-being, particularly in indigenous communities, as many indigenous peoples' identity, autonomy, and spiritual sovereignty are highly interwoven with their connection to their traditional language. And I just love how they always want to refer to indigenous folk. You never see our people put in their calculations. It's like we don't even exist. What happened to us? But they're gonna, when they say indigenous, they're talking about the Native Americans, and whatnot, and all them kind of people, but we're not factored in. So they're letting them know, look, you guys are destroying indigenous communities. There's health consequences for these people. Look, you're destroying their spiritual sovereignty, and their connection with their traditional language. Given the cultural identity, language, and social traditions are deeply interwoven, language loss can be a fundamental factor of ill health, but in indigenous communities. You see that? Wow. The National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organization defines health as not merely the physical well-being of an individual, but also as social, emotional, and cultural well-being of the whole community. For Aboriginal communities in Australia, language loss as part of a broad colonial attempts to culturalize. What about the cultural side that happened to Black folk in America? They don't want to talk about that, but we're going to talk about it. Is part of a cultural loss that plays a key role in ongoing intergenerational trauma, reinforcing health inequity. You see, whoever's writing this, they're really defending and helping and putting it out there for the Aborigines. Linguicide plays an active role in ongoing intergenerational trauma of the stolen, you see that? Stolen generations, which is known to negatively impact mental health and is implicated in high suicide rates. And I'm saying that the suicide rates in among the family in the Black communities, this is not just somebody just putting a rope, and going somewhere and hanging themselves, but you committing suicide when you don't want to take care of your family, huh? When you want to sell dope to your brother and your sister. Could it be because of this language death and its connection to identity? Come on, somebody. Now, it goes on to read, similar forced health consequences for indigenous communities, not the health consequences for Black folk. No, but for indigenous communities. You see, we better recognize where we are and who we're dealing with. Similar forced assimilation practices instrumental in colonial linguicide, such as removal of children to residential schools, have created language loss in indigenous communities around the world. As a consequence, indigenous peoples experience heightened negative mental health effects, such as substance abuse, trauma, and depression. A study conducted on Aboriginal youth suicide rates in Canada found that indigenous communities in which a majority of members speak the traditional language exhibit low suicide rates. Contrary, suicide rates were 6 times higher in groups where less than half of its members communicate in their ancestral language. Many indigenous communities take on a holistic view of health, in which a connection to culture and language is essential to well-being. Together, culture and language build a foundation of a collective identity, a collective identity. This, I love this information that's coming out. Don't you? Thus, language death can have severe effects on health. And so some of us are wondering why, what's going on? Who is it? Marvin Gaye. What's going on? This is what's going on. All right. Language death, cultural death, colonial linguicide. That's what's going on. A genocide of genocides of cultural, of collective identity. That's what's going on. And then it goes on to read language. It goes on language, talking about language revitalization. And that's why I wish some of you would reach out to me and join me in Operation Isaiah 58 for the Restorative Justice Identity Empowerment Project, so we can work together on this, on reparations. We call it, they call it a restorative justice or reparations, but the Bible calls it inheritance. So please reach out to me. Now, so let's continue on reading The Great Secrets of Israel, Discoveries Among the Bantus of Africa, and the Sacred Meaning of the Song of Solomon, translated according to the African Palaver, written by the beloved Pastor Thomas Vanda Odimba. Now, as we continue on in chapter 5, we're in the section, The Presence of Judaism in Black Africa, on page 49, the priest, the faith, and the temple. Today, I'm just going to go over the priest, the faith, and the temple. Now, on page 49, it reads, okay. It is important to remember that the arrival of Jacob, the religion and its laws as Moses handed them down, was not in existence. These came along with Ethiopian, Nubian, and Kenyan communities. The formation of the large, from the time of Moses up to the era of Solomon, they obviously underwent some transformations that modified them with regard to the previous philosophical and theological perspectives. The formation of the large Jewish congregations of Black Africa was a result of massive migration from Arabia, Sahara, and Yemen, of which some races remain in the Sudan and many other countries. The presence of the remains of the synagogues of the Sahara, Arabia, and Yemen proves that there was a connection, there was a concentration of large communities that left Palestine. And this is referenced in The Jews in the Sahara by Jacob Oriel. At the fall of Harar, arid land in Hebrew, or the Sahara of today, the Jewish communities moved from the north to the south, bringing along with them the religion, culture, and names, footnote 23. This was how they settled at Harari, arid land of the south, or the Kalahari desert of contemporary times. Okay, the next section is the priests of faith in the temple of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. Now, this is where it's going to get very interesting. The information is brought forth by Pastor Odimba that the story of the great temple of Zimbabwe and its pilgrims was narrated in the oral tradition in Southern Congo corroborates the biblical prophecy of Isaiah in chapter 19, verses 19 through 20, which announces the construction of the last Jewish temple in the middle of Africa, whose ruins would remain as a testimony of the presence of God in Africa. So he's stating that this was an oral tradition. This oral tradition corroborates the biblical prophecy. So remember when he was stating in our earlier videos and readings where that the discrepancy between, hold on, I want to get it because I want to read it right. One moment, please. Here it is, where he states here on page 8, important information, choice of biblical story, that he says, over the years, history has been used as a formidable weapon for protection, repression, and defense for the conquering nations. Given that it's very difficult to subdue people who have a profound knowledge of their history, each nation had a true story that they concealed and legends that they used to protect themselves. Now this is the part I want you to pay attention to. What differentiates history from legend is the discrepancy that exists between some historical narratives that have been written by some of the more powerful nations that dominated the Hebrews and the Egyptians after David and Solomon, and what the Bible and Egyptian texts say. Right? So, and then he goes on to say that that's why that he uses the Bible is the only book that we can. He says, by virtue of these discrepancies, we observe a certain war of ideas between the new overlords, the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, and the old ones, namely Egypt and Israel. Right, and so he goes on to state that we can go to the Bible to get the accurate, to verify what is true in history. The Bible is the primary source. So according to the Bible and the Southern Congo, the oral tradition, it corroborates with the biblical prophecy of Isaiah when it states, quote, Isaiah chapter 19, verses 19 through 20. On that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the center in the land of Egypt. And remember, Africa was called Egypt at one time, the whole of Africa. And a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a savior and will defend and deliver them, end quote. Pastor Odimba goes on to state that this prophecy that was announced 7 centuries before our time was confirmed by the ruins of Zimbabwe, which was attacked several times without being completely destroyed, as was the case with other Jewish vestiges in Arabia, Medina, and Mecca, Sahara, and Yemen. Its connection with either Jewish monuments was confirmed by all those who saw it. For instance, Mauck, the German geologist of 1872, was convinced as Hegel during his era, and therefore came out with the hypothesis that the structure in Zimbabwe was the replica of the Temple of Solomon and of the Temple of the Queen of Sheba, a replica of the Temple of Solomon and of the temple the Queen of Sheba lived in. Interesting. 20 years later, the column of the pioneers of Rhodes penetrated Mashonaland and encamped near these fascinating ruins. Marveled at what they saw, one of them wrote, quote, "Today, the Englishman is in the Ophir country," that should be Ophir, "opening once again the treasures of antiquity. We could expect to see in a few years the image of Queen Victoria printed on gold with which King Solomon adorned his ivory throne and the cedar pillars of his temple," end quote. Now, I got a little bit of information on the Great Zimbabwe, and here, Zimbabwe is here. Ophir, which provided King Solomon with vast supplies of gold, ivory, timber, and exotic animals, had propelled Columbus and his Portuguese contemporaries on their transoceanic voyages. Interest in Ophir again surged after 1790 as British readers speculatively mapped their widely dispersed commercial expansion against Solomon's possible trade routes. After 1860, Victorians came closer to achieving a consensus about the location of Ophir, first in India, where the handover of power from the East Indian Company to the Raj sealed that region's transition from trading partner to exploited colony. Then, after 1880, in Southern Africa, when reports of ancient gold mines accompanied glad tidings of great mineral wealth from that part of the world. This conjunction of events accompanied a major shift in Britain's relationship to its most precious metal. Instead of acquiring gold in exchange for exports, Britons increasingly invested directly in gold mines, most of which resided in or near different corners of their vast empire. British access to gold, in short, mirrored its changing relationship to the world from an empire of trade to one increasingly marked by conquest and annexation. Yet the apparent discovery of Ophir in ancient Zimbabwe, popularized in late Victorian novels, also replicated in microcosm the multinational scramble for Africa, mainly due to the appearance on the scene of the German explorer Karl Peters, who hoped to discover Ophir by forming an Anglo-German corporation. So, in terms of the Temple of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, quote, "These people made the same observations as Mach," footnote 24, "If we admit that there was a Jewish temple, we should equally acknowledge that there was a faith and Jewish priests who celebrated Mass in this temple. We cannot say the temple belonged to Jews without justifying the presence of Jewish priests in this region and explain their migration." Okay, so that's going to conclude this conversation for this segment. And the next segment, we'll be reading Pastor Odimba's information and research into the migration of the people, which is going to be a very interesting conversation. We're going to be reading the migration of the Jewish priests to South Africa, the history of this migration. And this is going to be a very important conversation, information that we need to know, we need to get in our in our heads. He's going to talk about the genetic relationship between the priests of Zimbabwe and the Kohens of Europe, and then the dispersal of priests and pilgrims from Zimbabwe, and these attacks from the Sabaeans, the Portuguese, and the German conquest in 1853. And I want to leave you with this last text from King Solomon in Proverbs 16:16, when he stated this: how much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding rather to be chosen than silver. Peace and blessings to all who love the truth, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Bye for now. Thank you for your time. Happy studying. Love you.